So I think we're all here. Perfect. Let's start then. Um, yeah, today we're going to do the other side of the coin. Um, it's about monism. Um, so before we start about monism, do people still have questions about dualism? Not seeing any questions. Nope. Okay. Um, then let's continue. So for today, I've got this on the program. Uh, Last time I had three neat rows um, about philosophy and then psychology and then therapy. Um, this time the rows aren't so neat. But first, I'm going to repeat a bit about what we said last time. I'm going through it a bit quicker than last time. Then we will talk about what monism is, and then a bit about science, and then the goal functional contextualism and monism, and then more about we'll view monism from the stimulus response relationship because uh, and and then we'll get into we'll delve into that, and then at one moment we'll delve into field theory. Oh, just give me 1 second, I forgot something. One moment. Yes, there I am again. Um, I've got some attributes. Um, so we'll talk a bit about field theory, about language as a field, and then about arranging uh, society through monistic lens when it comes to therapy. So that's basically it. So, but first, let's do a small recap of what, or not a recap, but a small retelling of how I started last time. So, well, last time I told you all I'm a bit of mystic, um, and um, mysticism says basically that in the beginning there was only love and light, and there was only one thing. And I showed you before that it's like you can imagine just one thing, a white light or a glowing light. Um, and there's nothing else than this glowing light. Um, but in this glowing light, you cannot experience anything, and so for any experience, you need two. Um, and so this source of light created darkness, an opposition, an opposite unit to experience itself as light. And once you create something, you have to relate to it. And that relation becomes a dynamic. So we said creating is relating and relating is creating, because when you relate, you also create a new dynamic. And I think we'll see how that works in a minute when we start talking about stimulus response relationship. So basically, you could say that there's an X and a Y. And then we talked about how two polarities how you can relate two polarities. So first we said that you can say X is important or only X exists and Y isn't important. So you would say there is only white. And you can do the reverse. You can say, oh, Y is only important and X isn't important. So then you should say there's only black. Like white, you could say that's like only the spirit is real and the material world is an illusion. And an example with black is the material world is real and the spiritual world is an illusion, or the metaphysical world is an illusion. There are different examples with both, but that's a example. Another example is the male female relationship, that in a patriarchy only the man dominates the woman, and it's only the man is important, the female is not important, and the other way around in a matriarchal. Sorry, I cannot. I was fumbling a bit on my words there, but in a matriarchal society, the females are the most important, and the males are not important. So you can flip those around. So next we have separation. So that X and Y are both there, but they're separated. You can view this as this. And then you've got that the relationship that X and Y make are dependent of each other, and they form a unity as a whole. They both form a unity as a whole, which is basically yin yang. So what I forgot to say last time, and what I want to still address, that in mysticism, dualism, what basically, this is dualism here, where they are separated. Dualism is also called separation consciousness. So if you hear separation consciousness, that's basically referring to dualism. It's basically the same relation they refer to. So I found that interesting, and I wanted to share that with you, a little tidbit. So last time we saw that that dualism basically was a bit soul crushing. That's how I experienced it, at least. And when I look at dualistic, I say dualistic creations, the society, how we create society. There's a lot of separation in our society. A lot of this part of the organization. If you work in an organization, this part of the organization does that, and that's separated from another part of the organization, and there's little interaction with those parts. But there are other ways to frame to see dualism in our society, I think. But I find it soul crushing if I look through a dualistic lens. Or I think that's what you get. So today I hope to have a more uplifting story with monism, and I hope to share that with you. But basically, that's in a nutshell what we discussed last time. And if you weren't there, there's a recording available. It's open for everybody, so please watch the recording from last time. I will be pointing to some things I said last time, but I think even though if you by some happenstance joined us just now, I think you will do just fine. Oh yeah. So I will get to now. I will get to this later. Oh yeah. So, now I will do this now. um. So to me, the a monistic view of the world makes the participation of both entities important. So when we talk about therapy, that means that the therapist and the client are both important. They're both valuable. And I hope I will get this message across in the next 2 hours. I mean, because this is to me is the quintessential thing about monism that brings the heart in therapy again. At least that's my understanding. So what is monism? So monism is actually saying that this and that, two polarities, are part of a single, are both part of a single unit, and those polarities are in a dynamic. So there's this, you could almost say it's like a dance. It's a dance between this and that, between um well, if you go the religious route, between God and me, between, and if you go the like the gender route, is like between masculinity, femininity. So you could view polarities in a like in a dynamic between the two, and that dynamic between the two polarities, that makes up the whole event. So there are two polarities here, but it doesn't make it dualism for me. So I think that's important to note, because people tend to say that if there are polarities, then it's dualism. That isn't necessarily this isn't necessary for me, because if the two polarities are dependent on each other as a single whole, that's also monism for me. Um, so you could substitute this and that for X and Y. Oh yeah. So I'd like to tell a story, and I will get back to this story as we continue. But I'm recently I'm busy with my theme, an inner theme, as it were, of my masculinity, and what it means to be masculine, or to know my own masculine power. Um, and while I was busy with that, while I was like contemplating that, one morning this week, one morning I woke up, and it just hit me that I was actually identifying myself with the failed man. And I don't know if you directly know what I mean, but to me, a failed man is like this man who lost everything, who isn't worth anything anymore, who feels like he doesn't have anything to of value to add to the world. He doesn't matter. There is no fighting spirit. There's no adventure in him anymore. There's let down. That's the word, let down. You know, that's a man who has let everybody, including himself, down. So there's no reason to get up. There's no reason to fight for anything anymore. Um, so I will get into why this failed man is part of me in a moment when we discuss history. Um, but after during that day, I was like, okay, so or let me stay with the morning. So in the morning, I wanted to get rid of the failed man, right? I didn't like the failed man in me, because it was like hindering my my being masculine, right? But then I started thinking at monism, and I thought, no, wait, Richard. If you want to get rid of the failed man, you also get rid of the masculine man, or the powerful masculine man, because those are, I get goosebumps when I'm telling this, but they're those are two parts of the same unit. Because without the failed man, I cannot experience the more powerful masculine man. And without a powerful masculine man, I cannot experience the failed man. There are two interlinking units. So if I embrace the failed man, I give space to the powerful man as well. And yeah, so I'm still processing all of this, and I'm in a process of getting to know my masculinity. But this was an insight I wanted to share with you regarding monism. So we'll be discussing monism versus dualism, and in the same way as with the powerful man and the failed man, monism cannot exist without dualism. If I'm if I'm going to explain monism to you, and in explaining monism, I will probably say this is monism and that is dualism. This is monism and that is dualism. But that's actually wrong of me to do, because I should be telling you that they are one integrated unit, because that is actually monism, right? So that's the funny thing. When I was making this presentation, something fell off when I was like wanting you to learn about monism and telling you things about monism. Because every time I'm telling you something about monism, that's actually not, it's not precisely monism, because then I'm saying, yeah, one unit is better than the other, and then I'm just doing the X is better than Y game. And then I'm not doing the monism game. So that's why I'm telling you this, that monism and dualism are also two parts of the same unit, and that we should embrace dualism as well when we want to give space to monism. Just like with my failed man and my powerful masculinity. So to jump to another theme that we'll be discussing today, this the stimulus-response relationship. And I don't know if some of you heard about Cantor, but we'll be getting into a bit of a Cantorian view on this, on the stimulus-response relationship. Cantor basically said the stimulus-response relationship is one unit, and you should view it as a single whole. That's basically what Cantor said. In a nutshell, because he said much more, and I'm not pretending that I'm a interbehaviorist per se, but I'm very much inspired by interbehaviorism. That's how far I would go. But you could view this stimulus-response relationship as a dynamic of polarities as a single unit. And that's what I want to show you today, how you can view that, and what consequences that view has for how you see behavior, how you see therapy, and I think in the end, how you would organize therapy in a society. So are there any questions so far? I'm not seeing any chat, so I will go on. So we'll delve in a little bit into science. So if we see science as a whole, then the experimenter, the researcher, and the object of science are a single unit. So you couldn't, it's from a monistic point of view, you cannot separate them. And so you could not say that science is inherently objective because science is a dynamic between the scientist and the science being done, the objective science. And actually, contextual behavior or functional contextualism also sees this. This is also the view of functional contextual behavioral science, or functional contextualism, and also from behavioral pragmatism. Does anybody know the term behavioral pragmatism, or am I the first one to introduce that? I will just say that I'm the first one to introduce that. That may be the smart thing to do. So Dermot Barnes-Holmes introduced behavioral pragmatism as a philosophy, to look at the world, to add to the monistic view, or yeah, to I don't know why he added behavioral pragmatism, and he talks about the researcher always interacting with the science or the object of science as a whole, and therefore the researcher, therefore the goals of the researcher determines the way the science is approached, the object of science is approached, and therefore determines the whole methodology, the whole way of conducting the scientific experiment. So he says you should stay with the goal of the scientist, and that should stay naked in the wind, as he says it. Because the object of science and the scientist are so interlinked. And I heard Linda Hayes say, to combat that, Linda Hayes said, yeah, you cannot make a whole institute of science based on individual goals. But I don't know about that. I'm still on the fence. But that's where we're currently at in the philosophical world of interbehaviorism versus functional contextualism. But in both instances, the scientist and the experimenter are interrelated. Oh yeah, so and from this stems that science basically is a creation. And we can relate that to what I said earlier. Relating is creating. So how I relate to the object of science is creating my research. So another thing about science from a monistic perspective is that there aren't inherent patterns. There aren't inherent patterns. So a pattern is only a creation. So, for example, me brushing my teeth every night, I could say that it is a pattern, right? I'm brushing my teeth every night, but I'm probably not brushing my teeth every night in the same way. So I'm never brushing my teeth with one finger in my ear. Is that then a pattern that I'm not never brushing my teeth with one finger in my ear? Could we call that a pattern? Maybe, but why would we? Right. So a pattern is a creation to say something about the world that we want to point at, but it's not a real thing. It's our patterns are creations for us. In the same way, there are no discoveries. So I really love the word discovery. and in Dutch it's actually it's the same way. It means the same. So in Spanish as well, descubrir, I believe. So to discover, to uncover something. So, and that means that the thing that was uncovered was always there, and now it's visible right now, and before it wasn't. But you could say that monism is actually a creation. So science is a creation and not a discovery, because the whole scientific method is a creation, and it's you relating to the scientific to the object of science, which is a creation and to a certain goal, but not a discovery. So that's the bit about science, and I got this basically from Pepper's way of viewing contextualism. So you can find this all in the book of Pepper. It's called World Hypotheses: A Study of Evidence. So he basically says this about contextualism, and I thought that would fit nicely with monism. So last time we went a bit into the goal of functional contextualism, namely prediction and influence with precision, scope, and depth, and we looked at prediction and influence mainly. And we saw that dualism doesn't really work for prediction and influence, and that was because you could not verify the influence from y over x and from x over y. I don't know if you remember like the puzzle, and then the puzzle influencing the cognitive process, doing the puzzle for money or no money. And then the influence the cognitive process has over your measurement. You don't know that. You don't know you don't know that relation. So you don't know this relation, the influence relation on your processes. And you only know prediction. You know only that a certain intervention predicts a certain outcome on a measurement. So Lorraine, yeah,
yes, there's a comment in the chat, actually.
yeah, I saw. Thank you so much. So Lorraine Nenke says, from the perspective of language as use, we're explaining that we mean what we mean by objectively, not denying it exists. Okay, so if I'm taking a monistic stance again, so the whole principle of subjectivity couldn't exist without objectivity. So if I would say that only subjectivity exists, then I would be doing X exists and Y doesn't. So then I wouldn't be monastic. But I think that the way we interact with our world is an interaction of us with our world. And I don't think you can I don't think it would be wise to view it as separate. If that makes sense. So today I want to show you how prediction and influence, how you need basically monism for prediction and influence. I think I taught you that already last time, but I'm doing it again anyway. So with research, you basically want to know the relationship. You want to investigate the relationship between two or more variables. And what you're actually doing is researching the dynamic. No, researching the dynamic between X and Y. And when you want to research the dynamic between X and Y, you need to have eyes on both. And then you can research the dynamic. So last time we did that with a ball and setting and measuring the time it takes to for the ball to drop down. And you can examine this relationship between X and Y of height and time. And once you examine that relationship, you now can influence the time it takes for the ball to drop precisely, and you can derive how high you need to hold the ball for that precise time that it takes for the ball to drop, and that's basically influence. You're influencing the falling time of the ball, and you can do prediction because you can say if I hold the ball this high, it would take that. I can derive how long it would take for the ball to fall down. So basically, you can if you understand the dynamic, you can complete the dynamic. That's basically it. If you understand the dynamic, you can complete the dynamic. And that's what influence and prediction is, if I'm being very blunt. So it would be very wise to see that as a whole, the dynamic. And to me, that's basically what monism is, to see the dynamic as a whole. And that's what we basically want in therapy as well. We want to know what my intervention or how I'm influencing the client's behavior. And I want to predict that by doing something, the client would react a certain way. So what I need is to understand the relationship and complete it. So to me, this is basically what therapy is. This is what it boils down to. So you see that I'm not focusing on methods. I'm focusing on the interaction between two people, the two behaviors. And that's it. So in a way, that makes the therapist, as just being the therapist, very important. So one way to put this is a stimulus-response relationship. You know, the client's responses are based on the stimulation of the therapist. I'm sorry. And you could view this as a behavior in context. So the behavior of the client is happening in the context of the therapist. And to me, those are basically the same things, just with different words. And when you get down to the nitty-gritty of RFT, they get a different how do you say a different meaning. But as long as we're not getting down to the nitty-gritty of the RFT, they actually mean the same. So now let's dive into stimulus response. I'm very happy to do this with you all, guys, because I really love the stimulus response relationship. So last time we talked about dualism. Again, I want to view dualism and the stimulus response relationship as polarities, as like I want to. I'm forgetting the word here. As a contrast, I want to contrast the stimulus response relationship to cognitive therapy or dualism. So we discussed René Descartes with mind-body dualism and interaction in the epiphyse, in the pineal gland. Then we discussed mechanism with the physical parts of the machine separate from the functional processes. And then we discussed the biochemical processes as separate from the cognitive processes, and that the cognitive processes are basically the a description of the functions of the physical processes, a functional description of the physical process. So that was that in a nutshell. And we discussed that and you have an input. The five senses are basically responsible for the input, and that input is getting processed by the processing unit, i.e. the brains, and those brains have functions, and then that processing gives an output, and that's observable behavior. So when we contrast that with the stimulus response relationship, then the whole event, the whole stimulus response relationship is the behavior. So when we're talking about behavior, it's the stimulus response relationship. That's the behavior, or behavior in context. That's the behavior. That's the event that we're looking at. And this is basically the same notation, or a different notation, but basically saying this. So what is a stimulus response relationship? What does that entail? So what you're seeing is a man in the rain. He only has a newspaper, and he uses that newspaper to cover his head from the rain. So this is a behavior in context. This is the behavior or the response is holding the newspaper above the head, and the stimulus or the context is the rain. So when we would view that as separate units, then this would be the behavior. Then that's quite silly. It looks silly if you take out the stimulus or take out the context. That's silly, and even people, when I show this to people, even then they will just make up the context. So then people will say, "Oh, it's sunny, and that's why he's covering his head." So they always imagine they always imagine the part that isn't there. So that's nice that you already see that you make up the whole. Yeah, you're trying to make it a whole. So this is from a paper from Gardner I found from 1989 about the difference between Skinner and Cantor, which I very much liked. You can find it on the internet. Just Google Gardner Cantor and you will find it probably. It's a PDF. The internet is really like for scavenger hunts like these. It's perfect. But he said that psychology is the organism as confronted. And that both Skinner and Cantor looked at behavior as the organism as confronted. And I really loved that way of that phrasing of the stimulus-response relationship or behavior and context. Because basically you've got the response, the organism, who is confronted with the stimulus, or the behavior confronted with the context in response to the context. And that as a whole, yeah, I just love it. I love the I don't know, I love it. So when we just take this basic thing, the organism as confronted, I think we get to a very important point, which we see as being made in articles in the 90s by Linda Hayes and Stephen Hayes. There's an article in 1992, and there's an article by Biglan and Stephen Hayes in 1996. Both very interesting articles. But in both those articles, they hint or they say or they hint to that the clinician or the therapist is basically the most important unit in therapy, because the way I translated that is that the client is confronted with the whole therapist. So you as a therapist, you are not your methods, you are so much more, and the client is confronted with you at the first moment of interaction. So when maybe even when he hears about you, or when you open the door, the way you approach him then or her then, the way you offer them something to drink, or everything matters, because everything, they are confronted with everything you do and you present them with, even things that you cannot change about yourself, because I'm like a white male. I cannot change, or I'm not going to change that for every client, maybe I could change some of it, but I'm not going to change that for every client. And I have a beard and stuff like that. That's parts of me that I don't want to change, or I'm not going, or I cannot change. Even those things they are confronted with. So, and those things might be important. So I think we should regard the therapist as a whole with which the client is confronted with. And I love client-centered therapies, but I think they're missing a part. I think they're missing the therapist as a whole again, as well, because client-centered therapies tend to see the client as a whole, but I think you also need to see the therapist as a whole. And I think then you hit the right spot. So basically, with dualism, we saw that when I reach back to dualism, we saw that the clinician or the therapist is substituted for methods, for interventions, and the client is substituted with disorders or cognitive processes. And the interaction isn't going so much about between them, but between the disorders and the cognitive processes and the interventions. So it takes out the humanity, you could say, the human aspect. And I think viewing the client as a whole and the therapist as a whole, and the interaction between them as a single unit, as a whole, I believe that brings the human aspect in the therapy again. to me, this is basically therapy. This image is therapy, and it's basically it lets the therapist shine as a human, as the whole who he or she is, and it lets the hopefully it lets the client shine as well. And actually, I've got this image in my practice, which says, "I'm valuable, you're valuable," and I think that's the most important thing I want to give you tonight. It's basically this: you are all valuable to me just by interacting with clients. Just by doing that, nothing more. You're valuable. So I hope that's my uplifting message for today. Because the clients will be confronted with you. It's you who they are confronted with. Yeah. So that's my most important message for today. And we get into that. We'll delve into that a little bit more. So, I want to discuss a bit about inside and outside. So, in dualism, there is this basic notion of having a visible outside and a non-visible inside. Right? I cannot see somebody else's thoughts, basically, but I can see his behavior or his outer behavior. So this is a basic notion of inside and outside, which is tied to visible, invisible. So I will get those two things apart: visible, invisible versus inside, outside. And I first will discuss inside, outside, and then visible, invisible. So in dualism, they're both the inside and the outside are different processes. So you have cognitive processes for the inside, and you have biochemical processes for the outside. In behaviorism or stimulus response relationships, that's not the case. Because if we take back the organism as confronted, I can be confronted with my feelings, I can be confronted with my thoughts, and I still have to relate to both my feelings and my thoughts. And that's a new response. So my own response can be a stimulus as well. So these two events are both stimulus response events. I'm getting happy, or I'm feeling love when I think about my girlfriend. So my girlfriend, thinking about my girlfriend, which I'm confronted with, elicits happiness or a feeling of happiness. You could say that's the stimulus response relationships, just as putting a newspaper above my head when it's raining is a stimulus response relationship. So it's not a different process. It's the same process, inside and outside, same process. And that's what I like when you see how people relate to themselves. You can see that back in how they relate to others. So in therapy, if you see how they relate to you, that gives that's basically a way in and how they relate to themselves. It's not a one-on-one relationship, so you need to do a bit of puzzling there, but it can give you an insight. For example, when I'm the failed man, then I'm letting others decide what I should do. I'm saying sorry a lot. I'm the field man. I'm withdrawing from interactions, from relationships. I'm stepping outside the relationship, moving away from the relationship. So these are ways of how I interact with others based on how I interact with myself. So in a way, you could say that this is a stimulus-response relationship, and that is a stimulus-response relationship, me interacting with me, and the client interacting with the client, and that brings about our interaction. So that's basically inside, outside. So very important, not a different process. So visible, invisible. So again, with the dualism, we saw that the biochemical processes or the material processes are visible, and the cognitive processes, the mental processes, are invisible. But how is that with stimulus-response relationships? And I love these two events. So in the top right, you see a crime scene. And what I tried to depict was that you can only see the stimuli which were interacted with. So you see the knife that was interacted with. And when you arrive at the crime scene, you may see like this you see a knife, and a bloody knife, and then you see a messy room with things broken, and so the police would start to derive what the behavior would be from how the interaction was, right? So you see part of the interaction, you see the stimulus part of the interaction, and then you start deriving the behavior, which makes sense with that, with the stimuli you see that are interacted with. And the same thing is done basically with archaeologists, right? They see things that were interacted with, and then they try to complete the story. They try to complete the relationship. So they try to derive the responses that make sense in regard to the stimuli as they found them. So you can do it in reverse, and that's what you see at the bottom left, that somebody thinks about the sun and starts smiling. So when somebody starts smiling, I can basically derive that they are thinking about something pleasant, right? It's probably they don't start smiling when they start thinking about something unpleasant. And when I know a bit more about the context, maybe we're at the sunny beach, like, and then I love it when we're with the family, and we're at the sunny beach, and maybe I'm with my wife, and I'm just thinking about that, about a couple of days ago, and I'm just like, and then she's like asking me like, "Oh, what's going on? You're smiling," but she already knows it's like something positive, and then I can say, "Oh, I was just thinking about how lovely it was that we were at the beach all together." But you cannot derive it literally, but you can derive the functions, and we get that a bit later. But you can complete part of it, and once you know more and more about a person, you can complete more and more. Once you know more about the interaction, about the relation, about the interaction as a whole, how the person interacts with the world, you can basically fill in the gaps much easier and much quicker. And I think that's also the reason why in therapy you need time to interact with somebody, to see how they interact with the world, and to know where they're at without them telling them where they're at. Or I mean where they're at, what they're thinking of, and how they are relating to something that you don't see. Am I clear enough at this? Okay, I will continue that. So what I'm saying basically is that once you understand their interaction, you can make it whole without knowing one part. So if one part is invisible to you, but you understand their interaction, you can complete the whole interaction in both ways. And what I'm telling you now is actually based on a paper by Linda Hayes. It's called The Pseudo Problem of Private Events. Very interesting. So by seeing them as a whole, you can complete the thing that is currently invisible to you. And in that paper, she basically says that by training your observational skills, it becomes easier to complete the unit. So how I derived that is how I translate it is by getting to know the relationship, by getting to know the interaction, you can more quickly derive the you can more quickly make it whole. You can make complete the missing part. So I want to dive into a bit into functions to make the previous part a bit more sense. So the functions in cognitive therapy actually meant brain functions, right? So the functional processes of the brain. What the why certain brain parts behave the way they do. But that's not how we what we mean by functions here in stimulus response relationships. So the way this is a limited perspective on functions, so it's a bit broader than this, but I'll give you an insight. At least it gives you an insight. So the way you could say functions work is that with this man with the newspaper on above his head, you could say that the rain has aversive functions. He doesn't want the rain on his head. The rain is aversive to him, and the newspaper then becomes attractive or appetitive. So the newspaper gets appetitive functions. So the functions are the way are basically the way one relates to the to his context or the stimulus. It's aversive or appetitive. It's something that you want to move away from or want to have or you are seeking or approaching. And Am I going to add something to this? No, not yet. And this is not. Some people try to tie this down with the matrix, and that's I wouldn't do that, because things you approach are not necessarily nice. Things that you want or that you do. For example, an addiction is an S plus because you do that. It's attractive to you. It's appetitive to you. So the alcohol or something is appetitive to you. And from I don't know, from another level, it could also be an S minus because you don't like that part of yourself. So there can be a mix of an S minus and an S plus, but that's basically more. Then we have to talk about levels of rows, basically the updated RFT. But it can get quite complex, more complex than the matrix is showing you. So another way to view functions, or I don't know, another way is let me gather my thoughts here. I want to give you another example of functions, and I've got this example from the paper on behavioral pragmatism from Dermot Barnes-Holmes, and we'll get a bit more into behavioral pragmatism later on. But I really love this example on functions because and the example goes like this. So there are two people going to the mall, right? And one is Peter and one is Anne. And Peter is entering the mall, and once he enters the mall, he hears there is going to be a test. The alarm is going to be tested, right? And he's like, okay, sure. And then a bit later, just after that was being said, Anne is now entering the shop, entering the mall. And what you need to know about Anne is that she was in a fire accident a year before at her job, at her company, which was horrific. It was a horrific accident, and some colleagues were severely burned. And luckily nothing happened to Anne herself, but it left an impression on her. So now she gets into the shop, into the mall, and unknowingly to her, it's a test. She doesn't know it's a test. So right now the alarm goes off, and Anne sprints out of the mall, and she's in total panic, and Peter is just walking there, whistling about and going on with his day. So what you see here is that we have the same stimulus, namely the fire alarm, but both those stimuli have different function of the same stimulus has different functions to either Anne or Peter. So for Anne, it has aversive functions, and for Peter, it has quite neutral functions, you could say. So not an S plus, not an S minus, but a neutral. So maybe for Peter, an alarm would be an S minus if nothing was being said. So, and for Anne, it's an S minus. So let's say you would see Anne like screaming on the streets and you wouldn't know about the alarm. You would definitely or you think she might be a bit crazy, or you think that she was being confronted with something really scary. Probably the latter one. But so you try to make up the whole. You can make up the whole, because if somebody's panicking, there's something that they are panicked about. So in a way, you can see how they relate to the thing that they are confronted with. And once you interact with people, you get more and more notion how they interact and what it makes that a certain stimuli have certain functions, and you get an insight in how the whole behavior moves as a whole. So while you cannot topographically make it complete, the response and the stimulus, so you cannot know that when you see Anne running down the streets, you cannot know that it's basically the mole, which mole she was, which alarm of which mole she's running away from. But you can sort of make the functions complete. So, and that's, I think that's also good to keep an eye on, how people are relating to you. How they're interacting with you. Are you an S plus or an S minus? Are you aversive to them as a clinician or as a therapist, or are you appetitive? And you're playing as a clinician, you're playing with that because you want to confront them with things that they don't want to be confronted themselves. So in a way, you have to play this S plus S minus game. And you don't want to be an unsafe person, so you need to establish a relationship, and that's basically S plusing yourself. It's making yourself more plus, and then inside that you're going to integrate the confrontation, which is S minus. The other way around is also fascinating to me, because if you see yourself as part of the interaction, then clients can do something to you, and that can say something about the interaction as a whole. So sometimes when people talk very much, and they are on and on, they're just like rambling on, then at one point I just start thinking about like cooking or random things, and then I'm distracted. But I if I understand interaction as a whole, then I can think, okay, but it's not okay that I'm distracted. I don't want to be distracted, but what in her behavior makes me distracted? So what function does it have for me to be distracted in regard to her behavior? Does that make sense? I'm looking at the chat for a moment. So Lorraine is saying our behavior of making a hypothesis or story to explain a response only happens when the behavior is perceived as unusual. So we are part of the definition of stimulus and response. Oh, So we are definitely part of the definition of stimulus and response. We are part of the interaction, and we are, so even if the behavior is not perceived as unusual, we are part of the definition of stimulus and response. The whole stimulus and response thing is a creation just to get influence and prediction on behavior. So yeah, I'm totally with you there. Still, I love the stimulus response relationship. I really love it. So so me being distracted is not per se a negative thing for me as a clinician. I don't like it to be distracted. I don't like to be the distracted therapist. That is not something I like to be, but it's not. It also says something about the interaction at that moment, because in a way, the talking of the client pushes me out of the relationship, pushes me out of the interaction with the client. And that very much can be a function of her talking, or him or them. Oh yeah, so and basically RFT says how you can transform functions through talking. So how you can transform stimulus functions. I'm not going into RFT too much today, although I also love RFT. But it basically says how you can transform stimulus functions through talking, through language, and I think that's amazing. You cannot do that with animals. It's amazing. Okay, so is everybody with from at this point? Great. So I told you that so this was this whole event about the fire alarm and the mole. This was from the paper from Dermot Barnes Holmes about behavioral pragmatism. So in that same paper, he also talks about the behavioral stream, which I want to dive into with you a bit. So in the last webinar about dualism, we basically said that history is linear, right? It's like if this happens, then that happens, and if that happens, then another thing happens. You know, an input, process, output, and that's basically the, the cadence of history in dualism. It's linear. It's one thing happens, and because of that, another thing happens, and because of that, another thing happens. But in monism, that's not really the case, because you understand history through a dynamic. So it's much more like a dance. It's a dynamic of two polarities, and that dynamic is the dynamic has a direction in time. That's all. So let's take an example here. So I was walking in the park a while ago, and while I was walking in the park, I thought about my girlfriend, and when I was talking in the park, the birds sang, and then I got very happy. And then when I got very happy, it made me think about my girlfriend, and then I thought, oh, I want to cook something nice for her, and then I walked to the shop, and then I bought some things, and then I started cooking. So then we have. I'm talking about it linearly now, but it's actually more a interaction with myself. So I'm confronted with one thing, and then I get confronted with another, and then I get confronted with another, and then I'm basically going in a spiral of interactions. It will get more sense later on. So it's basically a stimulus response, stimulus response, stimulus response relation. And you can view it as a stream, as a stimulus response relation stream. And basically, when I'm at the park, I cannot say that for certain that I will cook something for my girlfriend. Right? It's not that me being at the park always makes that I'm going to cook something for my girlfriend. So it's not linear in that regard. So it's like every interaction is a builds on top of the other as a kind of stream. And what Dermot basically said in his paper about behavioral pragmatism is that every stream is personal. So when we go back to the alarm being the alarm in the mall, he said you actually have two stimuli because the stimuli for Anne is a different stimulus than a stimulus for Pete. Although topographically they are the same stimulus, we can regard them as two stimuli. And in that sense, the behavioral streams for each person are personal. So this example I've got from Emily Sandos's paper. I can't remember the title, but she talks about interbehaviorism. And I want to tie this into history. So what she basically says is that you can view therapy as making pottery, right? So baking a pot, and then the pottery baker is interacting with the pot, right? He's shaping the pot, and every single interaction with the pot shapes the shape of the pot, or shapes the shape of the clay into the pot. But the pottery baker is not only interacting with the clay from that moment, it's also interacting with its history, because the clay may have a certain texture, a certain chemical composition, a certain qualities to it, like the moisture of it, and that all came to be in the context where it was found, where the clay was found. So let's say that the clay was found in a near the river, then that clay would have certain qualities to it that were based on its context, the context in which it was formed. And the pottery baker is basically interacting with the history of the clay by interacting with the textures of the clay, the way the pottery baker does. So its history, the history of the clay, also shapes the pot or shapes the interaction. Does that make sense? Perfect. So I'm going back to my failed man again. So, and I would say that I would be talking a bit about my history as a failed man. I think it started with my grandfather. So I can see the failed man in my grandfather, in my father, in myself, and in my son. I've got a 4-year-old son, and I see some aspects of the failed man in him too. So my grandfather was quite an adventurous man. He was 60 in the end of in the end of the 50s. Like just after the war, he was it was like 57 at the end of the war, and he was a adventurous type. He had his own factory. He in light bulbs for radios. He had an airplane. He had a car. So for that time, he was really an adventurous man, a successful man, and that was when he uh, came across my grandmother. She was from Austria, so my grandfather was from the Netherlands, and she was from Austria, uh, and she lived in the mountains. She was like 27 at the time, so it was quite a large age difference. And then this adventurous man comes to this small Austrian town, and then he swept her off her feet. And 6 years later, he went bankrupt. His company went bankrupt. And by getting bankrupt, he couldn't provide for his family anymore. So my grandmother needed to start working, and she started working as a teacher. But 6 years prior, I don't think when she came across my grandfather in Austria, I don't think she um, envisioned herself as a woman uh, from a woman from um, of a bankrupted man. Uh, I think she envisioned like the adventurous type he was, life with the adventurous type, but not with the failed type. And um, he also, I think he really got into the failed man because in a way, he also didn't stood up to my grandmother anymore when he fell, when she was stepping over his boundaries. So in a way, the whole power, his whole masculine power was sucked out of him um, because of that. And then my father grows up in such a family, and uh, he finds a woman who he finds my mother, he finds a wife who is a bit bossy, who can be dominating, and he finds it hard to stand up to her and really have the courage to confront her. Um, and that passes down onto me. And I had a hard time in my youth with standing up for myself and with feeling the desire to add something to the world, or to feel that I was worth something. So I felt really worthless, and I had a hard time with that. And then now I see like small things in my son, in that he has a hard time in um, practicing things. So he wants things. He wants things to. He wants to be able to do things to have them achieved, but he doesn't want to fail in doing so. He doesn't want to practice, which means failing. So I can see bits of the failed man in him too, and that pains me. But you can see this history shining through multiple lives. You can see that, like, yeah, that happening, shining through. So in a way, you interacting with me all here is actually also a bit interacting with my grandfather. You could say it like that. Yeah. So when we look at in one single life, then me being part of my family made me feel that I'm not important or not, yeah, not valuable. And then later in life, I just think, oh, I find it so hard to get out of bed. I feel heavy, but I cannot remember that it's coming from there. But it's still, in a way, I'm still interacting. When I'm not getting out of bed, I'm interacting with my past, and even my past outside of my own lifetime. So, yeah, that's basically the analogy of the pot. It's like the pot, the clay of the pot formed somewhere, and the pottery baker is interacting with that pot based on the history of the clay and stuff like that. So in that sense, it's less linear. It's less, because history is like happening as well. History is happening now as well. You're interacting with history now, in a way. So it becomes a bit silly when we're talking about therapy. It becomes a bit silly to say that one unit is influencing one other unit or one process, and so one intervention is influencing one process, and that process is influencing a behavior. That's a bit silly from this view as life as an interaction. You cannot single out these things, because it's not like that. I couldn't say that right now I'm the failed man because my grandfather I say was bankrupt. That would be dumbing down the complexity of all those lives, of my grandfather's life and my father's life and my life and my child's life. That's not, that would be silly, because things could happen differently as well. Maybe my father could have had therapy, and then the things could have, then that was part of my history as well, but that didn't happen. So that's like, and it's not blaming him, but it's like showing you that that's not a one-on-one relationship. That's not, yeah. And so in therapy, it's like those two streams are like interlocking, are interacting together. Those two personal streams are like, yeah, interlocking, becoming stimulus response, response stimulus. So the behavioral stream of the client is what you're confronted with, and the behavioral stream of you is what the client is confronted with, and by that they're interlocking. You could view it as such as well. And this is why I also I also have a warm heart for inner child work. That's basically inner child work is I don't know if everybody's familiar with it, but it's basically saying that you have inner children and that you have to take care of them, and that you and they can have traumas or however you want to call it. Bad experiences happened to them, and it wasn't yeah at that time it wasn't dealt with in the right way, and then you have to deal with it yourself in the right way, in a nutshell. And so you have to take care of your inner children, and that's basically taking care of your history. That's in a way, I like to look at it through that lens. So, and another thing I like to look at is like layers of ourselves. So throughout history, we learn things about ourselves. Like I learned to be the failed man. That's not really who I feel I am in essence, but it's like I learn, and it's like a layer of me. And all these you get these layers through life. That's how I like to look at it. Just like the pot with this history. So one way to do therapy is like in this behavioral stream, throwing just a rock in it. And what happens when you throw a big rock, then the stream just moves along it, just, and then it follows its original trajectory. And sometimes this feels like short, or this feels like what interventions, like in dualism interventions are. Because I don't feel like they're taking in consideration the whole stream, and maybe you don't need to take in consideration the whole stream because that's quite a lot, but the stream. And I'm much more in favor of throwing in little rocks, because little rocks you can do more precisely. So what could you see as a little rock? So me opening the door and saying, "Lovely to see you again. I find it lovely to see you again. I find it lovely to have you again. You're welcome. Come on in." Something like that. These little sentences, they can be small rocks. And giving something to drink, making them welcome, making my clients welcome. Those are small rocks I'm just throwing in. And with the pot, with the pottery baker making a pot, he's also doing subtle movements. Sometimes not so subtle, but most of the time subtle movements to shape the pot, right? And it's hard to say when the pot is not a heap of clay, but becoming a pot. What exact moment is the pot a pot and not a hump of clay anymore, right? But you could say at the end that it's a pot, and at the beginning it's a hump of clay. But you cannot say exactly where the switch happened from it going from a hump of clay to being a pot. And I feel that's like basically what therapy is as well, because when you throw in little rocks, I heard clients always say to me, "Yeah, Richard, I don't know what happened, but something definitely happened." And I cannot point to the thing that was like, "Yeah, and now you were there, and now you were better, or now you achieved it," because you cannot say when the pot became the pot. So if you throw in little things, little interventions, and an intervention can just be like looking at a person. That can already be an intervention. Just looking at a person, just being quiet with somebody. That's an intervention. They're definitely confronted with you. I do that very often at the beginning of therapy, that I'm quiet with my clients, because first of all, I don't have so much to say. You wouldn't say that now, but in therapy, I don't have a lot to say, or nothing that is like of substance. It's like, no, it doesn't add anything to the present moment, and it's like, okay, and I will let that thought happen, go by, and not bring into the interaction. So I'm quiet, and I'm being present with my clients. But you should see them freak out. It's like, that's heavy shit when they're just confronted with me being quiet. So I'm here doing very little and getting a major response. So even by doing very little, you can get major responses. I love that. So just letting them be confronted with me, just me, nothing special. Or maybe it's special, but then everybody is special. But just being confronted with me is eliciting a major response. I think that's amazing. And you can just, with a glance, with a way of looking, it's also an intervention. Or moving from forward, or from backward to forward, or the reverse. It's also an intervention. All these small things you can do, all interventions, and all making the stream go in a different direction. So you could see, like, this is the stream, behavioral stream, and then what you do is, when you do small interventions, of course the stream is going its normal course, but when you continue, I think that you can divert the course of the behavioral stream, and it happens through the interaction with you. And I think that's amazing. I really love this whole idea that the whole interaction with you is the main thing, and that's where it happens, and that's how you can redirect a behavioral stream. So you might ask, Richard, what do you think of methods then? What place do methods and like exercises have? So, like I said, in dualism, there's a one-on-one relationship between cognitive processes and exercises. But I don't think in monism, I don't think you can say that, because if every stream is personal, how does that exercise relates to that stream? That's you're not going to make a one-on-one relationship. That's insane from this perspective, not from the other perspective. From this perspective, that's insane. Because you have to interlock two behavioral streams. And of course, the learning those exercises is part of your behavioral stream. So I've learned hypnotherapy. That's definitely part of my behavioral stream. I do things the way I do because I learned hypnotherapy, or not because, but influenced by hypnotherapy. It's the way I use language. The hypnotherapy is very adamant on your way of using language. So that's what I learned, and that's part of my behavioral stream. So I don't say exercises are invaluable. The only thing is that I'm saying is exercises are not as important as you, because the client isn't confronted with the exercises, the client is confronted with you. And the exercises are part of your behavioral stream, which the client also interacts with. They're part of your history. Okay. So I don't see any questions in the chat, so I will continue if everything is okay with you guys. So I will talking a bit about the field, and the field theory is basically how you relate more than two interactions. So in dualism, we saw that relating two processes was quite impossible because you couldn't do that, and that like you have all these one-on-one relationships, like one brain process to a cognitive process, a questionnaire to a cognitive process, a symptoms to a disorder, an exercise to a cognitive process or process. But what if you have like 4 variables or 6? How would that work in monism? Like this, for example. That becomes already quite complex, right? So the way I would view that is like having this dishcloth, right? So this is what I would how I would view a field, because that's basically field theory. This is field theory. How you relate more than two things is basically field theory in a way. So if you ever learn about the behavioral field, this is in essence how it works. So here I've got the field. Right? You see the field here? It's this dishcloth. So nothing exists outside this dishcloth. This is the field. This is everything. This is our monistic principle. There's nothing outside of this. Right? There's nothing separate of this dishcloth. This is everything in existence. And not in existence, I don't know, but there's nothing outside of this. So in a moment, I will put my fingers underneath it to make it move. My fingers are not part of the dishcloth. There's nothing making the dishcloth move, the field move, but I have to. So let's say that I'm one point of my of the field is moving. See how the rest of the field moves. You see that a lot of points are moving right now. So by making one unit move, I influence a lot of units. If every single dot is a unit, I can make a lot of units move by making just one single unit move. And that's basically what interaction is. If everything is interacting with everything, then this is how interaction works on a grander scale. So this is how I visualize the field theory, Cantor's field theory, the interbehavioral field. And like I said, the field is a whole. That's all there is. It's the field. And to give you an example, I was in the elevator. No wait, yeah. So I've got I live in an apartment, and there's an elevator here. And I don't know if you have experienced this. You probably have, if you have ever been in an elevator, and I think you have. There are two people knowing each other and they're chatting, and then you're waiting for the elevator. The elevator doors open. You see them chatting, and then you enter, and their whole dynamic changes, right? But now you're also part of that awkward dynamic. Like they try to continue their conversation, but it's just a little bit different when you're around. And so just by adding your presence, you're changing the whole field. I've got another example of how small parts can redirect the field in one way. Small interventions. So in the Netherlands, we have traffic calming measures, and traffic calming measures is a way of letting drivers speed less, or letting them behave to letting them drive the speed limit. So let's say that the speed limit is 30 kilometers per hour. We have a sign, like everywhere we have signs, of course. But we also have road trees right next to the roads, so that you get a sense of narrowness. We have very many speed bumps. We have narrowings in the road. So we have all these small interventions that make it more likely that I'm not speeding. Thank you, Daniel. Daniel said, "I love the elevator metaphor." Thank you. So we have all these small interventions that the driver is less likely to be speeding. And then to give you an example, this is the way that it looks like. So here you have these narrowings, you have signs on the road, there's markings on the road that gives an impression of narrowness. And a bit further away, you see do you see that? I don't. Oh no. So in some areas you have, in the Netherlands, you have the pedestrian, when the pedestrian path crosses the car path or the auto path, the coloring of the pedestrian is continuing, and the coloring of the car path is being broken. So that gives a sense that this is a pedestrian path, not a car path. So all these cues, all these small cues, are making that the cars are getting a sense that they have to slow down, stop, and makes it more safe, makes it safer. Here you can see the lining on the roads again, the trees next to the road. This is how Dutch roads look like, and they have this purpose of making it safer for drivers and for cyclists as well. So if you contrast that to more Americanized roads, the Americanized roads are much broader, have trees much further away from the street, and basically their traffic calming measures are basically the road sign. If you're being very, very blunt about it. So here you see how a lot of small measures are moving the field in towards a certain direction, and that all these measures are adding up to moving the field in that direction, moving the field into drivers driving slower. So here I want to talk to you about probability. So you can imagine that with the field that there are a lot of factors involved, a lot of units involved, and that certainty is not very easily reached. So it's more about probability. And I will show you that by this example. So this actually happened. So the mailman, we get many packages delivered here in the Netherlands. I think it's like all over the world, but well, I don't know that because I don't live all over the world. But we get a lot of packages to our door. My wife likes to order a lot. So let's say that nobody's home. What would be the probability that I open the door? But probably zero, right? So that's what we yeah. So let's say that I am at home. What would be the probability that I'm at home? It will be closer to 100 than zero, probably, right? Let's say that my wife is at home. What would be the probability that I open the door? Well, it maybe gets a little bit lower again, right? Let's say that I'm at work. What's the probability that and my wife is at home? What's the probability that I open? Well, it gets a bit lower again, the probability. But now my wife is at work as well. Now the probability rises again. But I'm in a conversation. What is the probability? Now the probability might be a bit lower again that I will open the door. And now I'm saying, hey, darling, could you go? And now the probability is lowering again that I will be opening the door to the mailman. And now she's saying, no, please, you go. Oh, so all these small changes in the field are shaping the probability of an event happening. And so that's also the way I think about free will. I think free will exists, and it's a unit that we don't know the probability of. That we don't know the probability of it going one way or another. Or that we know the probability, but we're not certain. That's basically, I think that's free will. That it can, even if the probability is low, that it can go in a different way. So that's why we should talk about probabilities and not about certainty. So in the field, therefore it's really weird to make a one-on-one relationship, because you want to know the probabilities in a complex field, and you want to increase probabilities. So in therapy, you want to increase probabilities that a certain behavior arises in your client. And that's why you're putting all these little stones in the behavioral stream. So yeah, actually I said this already. I want to get to this picture because I've got this teapot. I bought this teapot in my practice with the two little cups. And it was funny what happened after I bought the teapot, because I was giving my clients tea, and they're very small cups, so you drink them fairly fast. They're empty fairly fast. So each time it's standing next to me, so I had to get across to my client and pour something in. So that's like a way of shaping the dynamic, shaping the field. So this small intervention, just having the teapot there, is shaping the field. It's, first of all, it's quite cozy, so there's more welcoming feeling. And I can just, for example, if the interaction isn't the way I like it to go, I can just say, do you want to have more tea? And then, because we're getting closer to one another, they have to get closer to me to bring their cup to me, and I have to get closer to them to fill the cup. we get there's this moment of a bit of bonding, you know, of getting closer to one another, and it breaks you can break the interaction with it. I just love that. Such a small thing, but such an influence over the field of therapy. So when we look from this point to quality measures, which we discussed previously in dualism, a webinar about dualism, that doesn't make really sense to me, because it's more about what you as a therapist do at that specific moment, in the interlocking of the two streams. And I don't see how you can get that into a list of qualifications, and that I really, that's like a major error in my mind. Yeah. So I'm getting a bit into RFT right now, and into language as a field. So I don't know if you know, but in one of the more recent papers about RFT, it was called the updated RFT. They said that RFT is more field than blah, 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 blah. I can't remember the rest, but RFT should be viewed as a field, basically. And I'm going to show you that right now, how language can be viewed as a field. So without all the RFT tidbits and technical stuff, I'm just going to show you the language as a field thing. So you can do this exercise with me. I'm going to let you taste a lemon. So if you want to, you can, for this exercise, you can close your eyes. And while you have your eyes closed or open, whatever you like, you can imagine you're holding a lemon in your hand. And while you can feel this lemon in your hand, you can maybe feel how it feels, what the texture of the lemon is. And maybe it's a bit ripply, or maybe it's soft or hard. Feel how your lemon feels. And while you feel how your lemon feels, you can also smell it. And maybe you can smell the lemon. And while you smell it, maybe you can also imagine it that you put it on a board and you have a knife next to it, and that you cut it open. And while you cut it open, this zesty smell of the lemon is already reaching your nose, and you can almost taste it already. And maybe you even want to take a bite in it, and go ahead, take a bite in this tasty lemon, and feel the soury juices of the lemon, the zesty soury juices of the lemon entering your mouth. So after you've done that, you can now open your eyes again if you had them closed. So I think probably what every time happens with me when I do this exercise is that your cheeks are starting to get tense, and that you start salivating, right? Salivating. It happens with me now as well. So what happens here? Oh wait, this is the Dutch version. So basically, we are saying this. We're relating all kinds of different words to lemon. lemon fresh, nice, juicy, zesty to bite in. And we viewed it as one network. What happens is that all these networks, all these words are adding to the how do you say that, the response of the cheeks and the salivating. So in a way, the functions, each word adds appetitive functions to the lemon. So because you're expecting to bite a lemon. So you're making the by adding the words, by adding the narrative, you're increasing the direction the field is going in. You're increasing the salivating in a way. So I've got another example on how the field moves. And it is with a spoon. So this spoon is called Mary, right? This spoon is called Mary. And what you need to know about Mary is that it's a mother of 3 kids, and she just lost her husband in a car accident. It was horrible. But this lovely Mary, she goes on, and she's such a great mother, and she does her best to really, how you say it in English, embrace the loss, or to integrate the loss while she keeps on being a mother. Mary. So what did I do there besides throwing the spoon in a rage? What I wanted to show you is how functions can change by doing by doing quite a small intervention. So what did I do? So we've got the network spoon, and I said network spoon is basically network Mary over here. So I constructed network Mary with all positive relations, and then I was hitting the spoon, but actually I was also hitting Mary. So when I was throwing away the spoon, Mary was going right behind it, right? It was like, basically, this is the spoon, this is Mary, and when I was throwing the spoon, I was throwing Mary as well. So by relating 2 networks in like basically a field, I can move 1 unit, and by moving 1 unit, the spoon, I'm moving the other unit as well. I'm doing something to the other unit as well. That's cool. This is basically what relating relational networks is. And this is why when you set up a field, then you can little things can have larger implications. So this is how I view RFT as a field. Daniel, how long do we still have? What's the...
Well, actually, we are in the...
I thought so already. Let me, we're almost done here.
Okay.
Just a couple of slides left. So my goal of therapy, I want to share you my goal of therapy because yeah, it's something I'm really passionate about. So my goal of therapy is inviting the beauty of the client. And by beauty, I mean the moment you see the sparkles in one of the eyes, or you know, the moment you feel the presence in the room of your client, you in a good way, you know, they are present with you, and they feel comfortable being present with you. I think that's awesome. And for me, that's going from this to this. It's going from me being a failed man to me integrating that failed man and also being the powerful man. That's when I can share my beauty with you guys. So for me, you have all these layers, and at the bottom layer, there is this negative core, how somebody relates to oneself, and those top layers are like for me, for example, the failed man, and at the top, it's like I don't want to get out of bed. What therapy does is basically going through these layers and inviting the beauty of the person. And for me, the beauty of the person is very closely related to um, the um, the darkness. So you have this metaphor of the pit, right? In ACT, and it's like getting down to the pit and sitting next to somebody in the pit. And once you do that, you have kind of you can create a kind of creative hopelessness. Like the client doesn't have to get out of the pit, and you don't have to get out of the pit, but you can just stay present with somebody inside the pit. And then this, when you do that, in my experience, uh, people can, like, through creative hopelessness, can start embracing their own darkness and embracing their own light and sharing their own light and sharing their selves with you and becoming part of the interaction, a valuable part of the interaction. And RFT helps to see the layers, basically, to get down into the pit. And I think once the client can share their beauty with you, they can also share their beauty with themselves and can relate to themselves in that way and share it with others. So that was in a nutshell what I think therapy is. And we discussed previously how we can arrange society, and last time this was basically how society is arranged in view of dualism. But like I said, I don't think quality checklist works. So what then? How can we oh, that's a long one. I will let in the chat. I will take that in a moment. So how can we support this interaction, this therapeutic interaction as a society? So I think we can make a fund that people can just apply to when they want to have, when they don't have the funds themselves. Maybe they should fund a part of it themselves, but I think we should make a fund and not with a lot of people. It's just like 150 would be more than enough per fund, maybe. I'm thinking something about like that, where the interaction is still on the forefront, when we kind of know each other a bit. And I think that instead of quality checklists, we can have like mentors, like being part. Like I had so much value in like supervision and being supervised by great people, and being a supervisor, I think that's a great way of learning and also shaping quality, because you have a context in which you are learning. And I think when the interaction is troublesome, we need a community to see how we can realign that interaction, or what we can do about that interaction, so that it gets out of its out of trouble. So that's like those are still like in their infancy. Those ideas are still in their infancy, but I'm working on how to apply that in yeah, that's what I think. Yeah, so this was basically a summary of what we did. I will skip that one in service of time. I will just go to the end. I hope I could show you this, that monism gets the love back into therapy, and makes the clinician important, and the client important as well, and shows the interaction as a whole. I hope I could show you that today. So that was the end of it. I will be reading the long chat for a moment. So Santogio Trijuli said, "Hello, greetings from Colombia. I wasn't at the previous meeting, so perhaps the question was addressed earlier. I would like to know your perspective on something I heard in a class, that processes proposed in ACT are not behavioral processes, and that differentiating issues such as mental and behavioral, or internal or external, implies dualism by definition." Yes, it does. The example of fusion was given as a non-behavioral process for which there is no evidence as behavioral process, and which then must be a mental process because it's said to be occurring in someone as a process, and by not, if there is evidence of such process, it remains a mental mechanism. So do you consider ACT, not RFT, to be dualistic or monistic, and why? I consider Hexaflex and Hayes's process-based therapy as dualistic. I don't consider ACT per se as dualistic, because the 1999 ACT, it's not as dualistic. And a colleague of me gives process-based ACT, and that's also not really dualistic. That's more monistic. So in my previous, go watch the previous one. Go watch it on. It's available to watch. And there you see that I mentioned the one-on-one relationship between process and intervention. That's basically dualism. And that's what fusion is, or diffusion. It's process, intervention, one-on-one relationship. Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you so much for having you. Yeah, thank you so much for having you all, and thanks Daniel again, and thanks for the translators. It was lovely.
Thank you, Richard, for this presentation, and everyone that is watching this recording. I think we all have a great job. This is recorded for posterity. So thank you, Richard, for being part of this, for contributing to the community,
It's
and
lovely.
giving your knowledge. Thank you.
Yeah, it was an honor, and thank you, Daniel. Thank you again. It was so lovely that you made this all possible.
Thank you all. See you later, and have a good weekend. Bye-bye.